At 2 a.m., Ciara was a free woman sleeping in her father's house in Baltimore, Ireland. By sunrise, she was cargo, chained to a burning timeline she couldn't escape. They didn't just take her freedom, they dragged her to a foreign market where men circled her like livestock. They squeezed her arms, checked her teeth, and priced her body cheaper than a horse. But Ciara was just one of over 1 million Europeans captured, sold, and forgotten in a story that history tried to bury. They thought she would break before she fought back. They were wrong. This is the brutal reality of the Barbary slave trade that schools don't teach you. If you believe the victims deserve to be remembered, hit the like button and subscribe. To understand her nightmare, you have to witness where it began. The mist rolled off the Atlantic Ocean, thick and smelling of salt and damp earth, wrapping the small Irish village of Baltimore in a suffocating gray blanket. It was a silence so profound, you could hear the heartbeat of the tide against the cliffs below. The year was 1631, and the air held the chill of early morning. Inside the thatched cottages, the village slept the deep, exhausted sleep of fishermen and farmers who believed their world ended at the horizon. The moon was hidden, leaving the narrow, muddy streets in absolute darkness. It was the kind of peace that usually promised a slow, lazy sunrise. Inside one of the modest homes near the harbor, Ciara shifted in her sleep. At 20 years old, she was a striking presence in the village, known for wild red hair that she usually kept tamed in a thick braid, and hands that were as skilled with a needle as they were with a fishing net. She was dreaming of the harvest, of the life she was building here on the edge of the world. Then, the world broke. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of wood splintering, a violent, wet crunch that echoed through the silence. Ciara's eyes snapped open. Before she could draw breath, the front door of their cottage didn't just open, it exploded inward. Shadows poured into the room. They were men, but they looked like demons born from the sea. They wore loose trousers and vests, their heads wrapped in colorful fabric that looked black in the dim light. They moved with terrifying speed, their curved blades glinting as they caught the dying embers of the hearth. "Father!" Ciara screamed, scrambling backward on her straw mattress. Thomas, her father, a man with a beard graying from years of worry and shoulders broad from lifting stone, launched himself from his bed. He was not a soldier. He was a man who loved his family. He grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and protective fury. "Get back!" Thomas roared, swinging the iron bar. It was a brave, hopeless gesture. One of the intruders, a giant of a man with dark skin and eyes devoid of mercy, didn't even flinch. He stepped inside Thomas's guard and slammed the butt of his heavy musket into the side of Thomas's head. The sound was sickening. Thomas fell like a cut tree, hitting the dirt floor with a heavy thud. He didn't move. "No!" The scream tore from Ciara's throat, raw and burning. She lunged toward her father, but rough hands grabbed her. These were not the hands of clumsy drunks. They were the iron grips of professionals. They smelled of sweat, foreign spices, and the copper tang of blood. They yanked her from the bed. She stumbled, her bare feet hitting the cold, wet mud of the floor. She wasn't wearing shoes. She wasn't wearing her cloak. She was in her thin nightdress, shivering not from cold, but from a shock that froze her blood. They dragged her out into the street. The scene that greeted her was the apocalypse. The entire village of Baltimore was awake and screaming. Torches were being thrown onto the thatched roofs. Fire began to lick at the sky, casting a hellish orange glow over the chaos. Men, women, and children were being herded like cattle toward the center of the village. As she was shoved into the line of weeping neighbors, Ciara saw him. Standing near the harbor, barking orders, was a man who didn't look like the others. He wore European clothes, but he stood with the pirates. He was pointing at specific houses, shouting directions in a mix of Dutch and English. He was a renegade, a traitor, a European who had turned his back on his God and his people to serve the slavers for gold. He knew which houses held the young women. He knew where the defenses were weak. He was the architect of their doom. Liam! The name escaped her lips before she could stop it. Through the smoke, she saw him. Liam, the young fisherman with eyes the color of the sea, and a laugh that could warm the coldest winter night, was fighting. He had a small knife, a tool for gutting fish, and he was slashing effectively at a pirate trying to grab a young girl. "Run, Ciara!" Liam shouted, his voice cutting through the din. He turned to look at her, distraction fatal in his eyes. A pirate stepped up behind him. There was no fanfare, no duel, just the flash of a blade across a throat. Liam dropped to his knees, his hands clutching his neck, the blood dark and instant. He looked at Ciara one last time, confusion clouding his gaze, before he collapsed into the mud. The scream died in Ciara's chest. The world went silent, even as the fires roared. A rough shove pushed her forward. They bound her hands with coarse rope that bit into her wrists. The heat from the burning cottages was intense now, singing the hair on her arms. She looked back one last time. Her home was a torch. Her father was likely dead inside. Her love was bleeding out in the street. "Move!" a pirate shouted in a language she didn't know, shoving her toward the dark water. She stumbled toward the longboats waiting in the harbor. The water was black and cold, reflecting the burning destruction of everything she had ever known. At Tuscodiem, she had been a free woman with a future. By sunrise, she was cargo. The transition from the small longboat to the massive corsair ship was a blur of violence and vertigo. Ciara was hoisted up the rough wooden hull, her hands scraping against the barnacles, before being thrown onto the main deck. The air here was different, heavier, smelling of unwashed bodies, tar, and the distinct metallic tang of old blood. The deck was a theater of cruelty. The sun was rising now, casting a pale, indifferent light on the separation of the catch. Ciara, shivering in her thin nightdress, was shoved into a cluster of weeping women. From this vantage point, she witnessed the cold logic of their captors. A tall pirate with a scar dissecting his left eyebrow walked the line of captured men. He was the quartermaster, a man whose eyes assessed human beings solely by their muscle mass and tooth decay. He stopped in front of a neighbor Ciara knew well, old Sean, the village net mender. Sean was 50, his hands arthritic, his back bent from decades of labor. The quartermaster grunted a single word. Two crewmen stepped forward. They didn't shackle Sean. They didn't beat him. They simply lifted him by his arms and legs. Sean was too terrified to scream, his mouth opening in a silent gasp as they swung him once, twice, and then released him over the rail. The splash was swallowed instantly by the waves. Useless for labor, useless for sail. A voice muttered near Ciara. It was the renegade again, watching the culling with a bored expression. He looked at the women, his gaze lingering on the younger ones. But you are the prize. Ciara squeezed her eyes shut, but she couldn't block out the sounds of the other useless men hitting the water. The young men were chained and sent to the rowing benches. The women were herded toward a black square in the center of the deck, the hatch to the cargo hold. Descending into the hold was like being swallowed by a beast. The light vanished, replaced by a suffocating darkness that pressed against the skin. The space was incredibly small, a low-ceilinged compartment designed for barrels, not people. "Sit," a guard barked, pushing Ciara down. She fell onto the damp wood. There was no room to sprawl out. She was forced to sit with her knees pulled to her chest, her back pressed against the curved ribs of the ship. A heavy iron chain was threaded through the shackle on her wrist, connecting her to the woman on her left and the woman on her right. To her right was a stranger. To her left was Siobhan, the baker's daughter from Baltimore, Siobhan was 18, soft-spoken and terrifyingly fragile. She had always been sickly, her skin pale as milk, her constitution unsuited for the harsh Irish winters, let alone this hell. "Ciara?" Siobhan whispered, her voice trembling. "Are we going to die?" "No," Ciara lied, though her own heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "We're going to be fine." But they weren't. Days bled into a singular, agonizing nightmare. There was no sunrise or sunset in the hold, only the rhythmic creaking of the timber and the sickening sway of the ship. The air grew thick and poisonous. With 40 women packed into a space meant for storage, the heat became unbearable. There were no buckets for waste. The floor became slick with vomit and urine, the stench so overpowering that it burned the throat and watered the eyes. Twice a day, a hatch would open above, letting in a blinding shaft of light. A basket of hard, moldy biscuits and a bucket of stagnant water were lowered down. It was just enough to keep their hearts beating, just enough to ensure the merchandise didn't spoil before market. They were fed like livestock, watered like plants. By the third day, the weeping had stopped, replaced by a dull, collective moan. By the fifth day, Siobhan had stopped eating. "Eat, Siobhan," Ciara hissed, trying to force a piece of biscuit into the girl's hand. "You have to." "I can't," Siobhan rasped. Her skin was burning, a fever consuming her from the inside. "It hurts too much." Ciara held Siobhan's hand, rubbing the thin fingers, trying to transfer some of her own stubborn strength into the dying girl. She whispered stories of the harvest, of the cool wind on the cliffs, of anything that wasn't this dark, stinking box. On the 8th day, the ship hit rough waters. The vessel pitched violently, throwing the women against each other. In the chaos, Siobhan's head lolled onto Ciara's shoulder. It was a heavy, unnatural weight. "Siobhan," Ciara whispered. There was no answer. Ciara shifted, trying to see her friend's face in the gloom. Siobhan's eyes were open, staring at nothing. Her chest was still. "Help!" Ciara screamed, rattling the chains. "She's dead! Help us!" Her voice was swallowed by the dark timber. The other women picked up the cry, a chorus of desperation, but the hatch above remained closed. The storm raged outside and the guards were not coming. Night fell, or what passed for night. The body next to Ciara began to cool. Rigor mortis set in, turning the soft baker's daughter into something hard and unyielding. Ciara couldn't move away. The chain was too short. She was tethered to the corpse, thigh to thigh, shoulder to shoulder. For 2 days, she sat there. In the dark, the line between the living and the dead began to blur. Ciara could feel the coldness of Siobhan's arm seeping into her own skin. She could smell the beginning of decay mixing with the foul air of the hold. Insanity clawed at the edges of her mind. She wanted to scream until her throat bled. She wanted to bash her head against the wall to make it stop. "They want you to break," a voice inside her whispered. It sounded like her father. "If you break, you're just a thing. If you survive, you are a threat." She stopped screaming. She stopped crying. She sat in the darkness, breathing in the stench of death, and let the horror forge her into something harder. She forced herself to drink the water when it came. She forced herself to eat the moldy bread while sitting next to her dead friend. Finally, the storm broke. The hatch opened. Light flooded in, revealing the nightmare in stark clarity. 2 guards descended, cloths tied over their faces to block the smell. They unlocked the shackle from Siobhan's wrist. They didn't say a prayer. They didn't close her eyes. They dragged the body up the ladder like a sack of grain. Ciara listened. She heard the heavy footsteps on the deck above. Then she heard the splash. The chain on her wrist was light now, but the weight in her soul was crushing. She looked at the empty space where Siobhan had been. I will not be a splash, Ciara whispered to the darkness. I will be a storm. The hatch opened, and for the first time in 17 days, the world was not black. It was a blinding, searing white that stabbed at Ciara's eyes like needles. She was hauled up the ladder, her legs trembling so violently they could barely support her weight. When she emerged onto the deck, the sensory assault was immediate and overwhelming. The air was hot and dry, carrying the scent of roasted meat, exotic spices, and dust, so different from the damp, salty air of Ireland. Through squinting, watering eyes, she saw it. Algiers. It was a city of impossible whiteness, cascading down the hillside like a spilled bucket of pearls, gleaming ferociously under the North African sun. Minarets pierced the blue sky, and the harbor was a forest of masts. To a girl who had never seen a building taller than the village church, it looked like a kingdom from a fever dream, beautiful, vast, and utterly terrifying. "Move!" a guard shouted, shoving her toward the gangplank. Ciara stumbled, the chains on her ankles clinking a grim rhythm. She was part of a long, miserable snake of captives being disgorged from the ship. The men, those who had survived the galleys and the culling, were separated immediately, destined for the stone quarries or the rowing benches. Ciara caught a fleeting glimpse of a boy from her village, his eyes hollow, being dragged away by a group of soldiers. She wanted to call out, but her throat was parched, sandpaper dry. They were marched through the winding, narrow streets. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of languages she couldn't understand, the braying of donkeys, the shouting of merchants. People stopped to watch them pass. Some jeered, others looked on with the bored indifference of those who saw human misery every day. They arrived at a large, open square, enclosed by arched colonnades. This was the Bedestan, the slave market. It was crowded with buyers, men in silk turbans, rough sea captains, and wealthy matrons looking for house help. Ciara was pushed into a holding pen. A man approached her, the Delal, the auctioneer. He was a short, wiry man with oil-stained fingers and a voice that cut through the noise like a trumpet. He grabbed Ciara's jaw, forcing her head from side to side, inspecting her face with critical, unfeeling eyes. He muttered something to his assistant, who scribbled in a ledger. Then came the humiliation that would haunt her forever. She was dragged onto a raised wooden platform in the center of the square. The crowd pressed in, a sea of expectant faces. The Delal barked an order. When Ciara didn't move fast enough, he seized the collar of her tattered nightdress and ripped. The fabric gave way. Ciara gasped, instinctively trying to cover herself with her arms, her face burning with a shame so hot it felt like physical pain. But the Delal slapped her hands away. "Look," he shouted in a mix of lingua franca and Arabic, gesturing to her body as if she were a prize heifer. "Young, strong, no disease." The buyers surged forward. They didn't look at her face. They looked at her limbs, her hips, her teeth. A heavy-set man with rings on every finger stepped onto the platform. He didn't ask her name. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep to test the muscle tone. He forced her mouth open, checking her teeth like one would check a horse. He ran his rough hands down her flanks, checking for wideness in the hips, assessing her breeding potential. Ciara squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking out. "I am Ciara," she screamed silently in her head. "I am a daughter of Baltimore. I am not this." But the voices below argued over her worth in cold mathematical terms. "Too skinny," one man grumbled. "She will not survive the winter." "She has fire in her hair," another countered. "Exotic. The Pasha pays well for red hair." "She is worth 8 oxen," the Delal declared, trying to drive up the price. "Maybe 10. 8 oxen?" A buyer laughed cruelly. "I wouldn't trade a good war horse for her. A horse doesn't weep." 8 oxen. The words settled in Ciara's chest like stones. Her life, her memories, her ability to love and dream, all of it was being weighed against livestock. She was cheaper than a horse. Then the crowd parted. A hush fell over the front row as a man stepped forward. He was different from the others. He was dressed in impeccable robes of deep indigo silk, and his turban was wound with precision. He was Yusuf, a merchant known for his discerning taste and vast wealth. He was not old, perhaps in his 40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that were dark, intelligent, and terrifyingly cold. He didn't climb the platform to grope her. He simply stood at the base, looking up. His gaze didn't strip her naked. It looked through her, assessing her value not just as labor, but as an object of status. He looked at her the way one looks at a vase, checking for cracks, imagining where it would sit on a shelf. "The girl," Yusuf said, his voice calm but commanding. He held up a bag of coins. "I will take her." The Dalal bowed low, the haggling instantly over. The coins were counted out, gold clinking against wood. It was the sound of her freedom being sold. Yusuf climbed the steps. He stood before her, close enough that she could smell the scent of expensive musk and tobacco clinging to him. He reached out, not to hurt her, but to tilt her chin up with a singular gloved finger. He looked into her tear-filled eyes and didn't see a person. He saw an investment. "You are filthy," he said softly in broken English, his tone devoid of malice, simply stating a fact about his new property. "We must clean you before you are seen." He turned and walked away, expecting her to follow. And she did, because the chain that bound her was now in his hand. As she stepped off the platform, leaving the sunlight for the shadow of her new master, Ciara realized the true horror of her situation. The chains on her wrists could be broken, but the ink in the ledger had dried. In the eyes of this world, Ciara of Baltimore had ceased to exist. Only the slave remained. The heavy cedar gates of the villa swung shut behind them, the iron latch falling into place with a sound that echoed like a hammer striking a coffin nail. The noise severed the connection to the dusty streets of Algiers, enclosing Ciara in a world that was terrifyingly beautiful and utterly silent. Yusuf's home was a palace of contradictions. To the eye, it was paradise. The courtyard was paved with intricate tiles in geometric patterns of blue and ochre. A central fountain murmured softly, the water clear and cool, a stark contrast to the stagnant bucket she had shared with the dead on the ship. Jasmine vines climbed the sandstone walls, filling the air with a scent so sweet it made her nauseous. But to the soul, this was a fortress. The walls were too high to climb, the windows covered with ornate wooden latticework, mashrabia, that allowed those inside to look out, but prevented the world from looking in. Yusuf did not speak to her. He simply gestured to a pair of female servants waiting by the entrance. They were silent women with heads bowed, their spirits long since broken into the convenient shape of obedience. They took Ciara by the arms. It wasn't a gentle guide. It was a firm escort. They led her to a small fire burning in a brazier in the corner of the courtyard. One of the women tugged at the shoulder of Ciara's nightdress. It was the same thin, filthy linen she had been wearing when the door was kicked down in Baltimore. It was stained with the mud of her village, the grime of the ship, and the dried blood of the journey. It was a rag, but it was hers. It was the last thing that smelled of home. "No," Ciara rasped, clutching the fabric. The women didn't argue. They didn't understand her, and they didn't care. With practiced efficiency, they stripped the garment from her body. Ciara stood naked in the courtyard, shivering despite the heat, her arms crossed over her chest in a futile attempt to hide her shame. She watched as the woman tossed the nightdress into the brazier. The linen caught fire instantly. The flames licked at the fabric, curling the edges, turning the memory of Baltimore into gray ash that floated up into the square of blue sky. Ciara is gone, the smoke seemed to say. Only the property remains. They led her into the hammam, the private bathhouse. The air here was thick with steam and smelled of rosewater and black soap. The heat was suffocating. The women scrubbed her skin with rough mitts, scouring away the dirt of the voyage. But it felt as though they were trying to scrub away her skin itself. They washed her hair, combing out the tangles with no regard for the pain, pulling until tears pricked her eyes. They weren't bathing a person. They were polishing an object before placing it on a shelf. When the bath was finished, they dressed her. The rough wool and linen of Ireland were replaced by foreign silks. They put her in loose trousers that billowed around her legs, a chemise of translucent gauze, and a vest embroidered with gold thread. They painted her eyes with kohl and scented her pulse points with heavy musk. They led her to a mirror. Ciara looked at the reflection and didn't recognize the creature staring back. The girl in the mirror was beautiful, exotic, and expensive. She looked like a princess from a storybook, but her eyes were the eyes of a trapped animal. This was the lie of the harem. It wasn't a sanctuary of romance. It was a prison wrapped in velvet. She was taken to a room on the upper floor. It was luxurious, with thick carpets and low divans piled with silk cushions, but the door locked from the outside. Night fell. The darkness crept into the room, heavy and suffocating. Ciara retreated to the farthest corner, pulling her knees to her chest, her back pressed against the cold plaster wall. She watched the door. Every minute was a torture of anticipation. She remembered the stories the women in the village used to whisper about the Turks, about the fate worse than death. She remembered Liam's blood on the ground. She squeezed her eyes shut and prayed to a god who seemed to have stayed behind in Ireland. Please let the earth swallow me. Please let my heart stop. Then, the lock clicked. The door opened. Yusuf stepped inside. He had changed from his street clothes into loose, comfortable robes. He carried a single candle, the flame casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. He closed the door behind him and locked it. He didn't rush. He placed the candle on a small table. He looked at her huddled in the corner, his expression unreadable. There was no anger in his face, no lustful frenzy. It was the calm entitlement of a man walking into his own pantry to take a piece of fruit he had paid for. "Do not be afraid," he said in Arabic, the words soft but meaningless to her ears. He moved toward her. Ciara pressed harder against the wall, wishing she could melt into the stone. She couldn't breathe. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a drum of war, but her body was frozen. He reached down and took her hand. His skin was warm, his grip firm. She tried to pull away, a small, pathetic resistance. He didn't strike her. He didn't shout. He simply tightened his grip, pulling her up from the floor with a strength that made it clear that resistance was not just dangerous, it was useless. He led her to the bed. The silence of the room was absolute. There were no screams, for who would listen? There was no fighting, for he owned the very air she breathed. As he extinguished the candle, plunging the room into darkness, Ciara stared wide-eyed into the black. Tears, hot and silent, slid down her temples into her hair. She did not fight him physically, the shock had paralyzed her limbs. But in her mind, she was screaming. She prayed for the ceiling to collapse. She prayed for a heart attack. She prayed for the end of the world. "I want to die," she thought, the wish screaming in her head as his weight settled over her. "Let me die. Let me die." But death did not come. Only the night remained, long and indifferent, while the girl from Baltimore was slowly erased, leaving only the concubine in the gilded cage. Time in the villa did not pass, it eroded. 3 years had ground away the girl who had arrived from Ireland. The soft hands that used to mend fishing nets were now red and cracked from lye soap and scalding water. The hair that had once smelled of sea salt now smelled of onions, lamb fat, and charcoal. But the greatest erosion was invisible. The name Ciara was no longer spoken. To the world, to the household, and increasingly to herself, she was Zainab. Zainab was no longer the exotic novelty kept in the upper rooms. The master's interest had waned as newer, younger captives arrived from the coasts of Italy and Greece. She had been demoted to the domestic machinery of the house, the invisible army that kept the floors polished and the tagines simmering. She spent her days in the scullery, a stifling, windowless room filled with the clatter of copper pots and the sharp commands of the head cook. "Move, Zainab! The couscous will not steam itself." She moved. She always moved. To stop was to think, and to think was to drown. Her only anchor in this drifting existence was Elena. Elena was a woman carved from granite and grief. An Italian matron captured 2 decades ago from the coast of Calabria. She was the oldest slave in Yusuf's household. Her back was permanently hunched from years of scrubbing floors, and her fingers were twisted knots of arthritis. She had survived by becoming a stone, cold, hard, and unfeeling. "You look at the birds too much," Elena muttered one afternoon as they plucked chickens in the courtyard. Her voice was a rasp of dry leaves. "Looking up hurts the neck. Look at your hands. Hands work, eyes work. The heart? Turn it off." "I can't," Zainab whispered, ripping feathers with unnecessary force. "I dream of the rain, Elena. Cold rain." "Dreams are poison," Elena snapped, though her eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "Do you remember the French girl? Camille?" Zainab nodded. Camille had arrived 6 months ago. She hadn't learned to turn it off. She had screamed at the walls, clawing at the plaster until her fingernails bled, shouting names of people who couldn't hear her. "She was loud," Elena said flatly. "The master does not like loud things. They took her to the Bistan." The Bistan was the asylum, but for slaves it was a death sentence, or worse, she might have been sold to the street cleaners, the lowest of the low, where women were worked until they dropped dead in the gutter. Camille had simply vanished, her screams replaced by the heavy silence of the house. "Be stoned, Zainab," Elena advised, tossing a plucked chicken into a basket. "Stone survives, glass breaks." But that evening, the prophecy turned on the prophet. The household was preparing for a feast. Yusuf was entertaining a high-ranking janissary, and everything had to be perfect. The air was tense. Zainab and Elena were tasked with carrying the serving platters into the main hall. Elena was carrying a large, intricate porcelain vase filled with rosewater for the guests to wash their hands. It was a Ming vase brought from the Silk Road, worth more than every slave in the kitchen combined. As they entered the hallway, Elena's bad leg gave way. It was a small stumble, a betrayal of aging muscles. She pitched forward. The sound of the vase shattering was louder than a cannon shot. Blue and white shards skittered across the marble floor. The rosewater spread like a pool of blood. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, the overseer, a eunuch named Hakim, who wielded a cane of woven rhinoceros hide, stepped out from the shadows, his face twisted in fury. "Clumsy hag!" Hakim roared. He didn't ask for an explanation. He raised the cane. "No!" Zainab lunged forward, her instinct to protect overriding 3 years of training. Elena, from the floor, looked up. Her eyes, usually so dull, flashed with a terrifying intensity. She shook her head imperceptibly. "Stop." If Zainab interfered, they would both be punished. Perhaps both killed. Elena knew the math of this world better than anyone. She curled into a ball, exposing her back, and took the punishment meant for a broken object. The cane came down. Crack. Zainab bit her lip until she tasted blood to keep from screaming. She stood frozen, a statue of horror as the blows fell. 1, 2, 5, 10. Elena did not scream. She grunted, her body jerking with each impact, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of her voice. When Hakim was finished, he spat on the floor. "Clean this up and get her out of my sight. If she cannot walk tomorrow, sell her to the tanneries." That night, in the cramped cellar where the kitchen slaves slept on straw mats, the air smelled of mold and impending death. Elena lay on her side, her breathing shallow and wet. The beating had broken something deep inside her frail chest. Zainab sat beside her, holding a cup of water, tears streaming down her face unchecked. "I'm sorry," Zainab sobbed. "I should have caught it. I should have—" "Hush," Elena whispered. Her hand, cold and trembling, reached out to grip Zainab's wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Listen to me. No time for tears. Elena, please." "Listen," Elena wheezed, coughing up a speck of blood. I have been watching, listening. There is a way." Zainab froze. "A way? The redemptionists," Elena rasped. "The priests, they are coming back, but they only talk to the rich. You need a middleman." Elena pulled Zainab closer. Her voice was fading, drifting away like smoke. "There is a merchant, Dutch. He comes to the harbor to buy spices, but he carries letters for a price. His name is Van der Hoven. He wears a silver cross hidden under his coat." "Why are you telling me this?" Zainab asked, her heart pounding. "Why didn't you go?" Elena smiled, a grotesque, beautiful shifting of her bruised face. "I am tired, Piccola. I am 20 years tired. My home is gone. My family is dead. But you—" She squeezed Zainab's wrist one last time. "You have fire. You are not stone. You are fire. Burn them." Elena's eyes drifted shut. The shallow breathing hitched, then stopped. In the dark cellar, surrounded by the breathing of sleeping slaves who had forgotten their own names, Zainab held the lifeless hand of the only mother she had known in this hell. The tears dried on her face, leaving salt. She let go of Elena's hand. She stood up. "Van der Hoven," she whispered to the darkness. She was not stone. She was not glass. She was Zainab, and she had a name to find. The Souk al-Atarin was a sensory assault, a labyrinth of narrow alleyways choking on the scent of cumin, saffron, and unwashed bodies. For Zainab, the woman who had once been Ciara, it was the only battlefield where she stood a chance of fighting back. She walked 2 paces behind Hakim, the eunuch overseer. He stopped to haggle over a sack of lentils, his voice rising in theatrical anger against the merchant. This was the moment. The chaos of the market was her cover. Her eyes scanned the crowd, desperate and sharp. Elena had described him perfectly. A mountain of a man sweating profusely in European wool that was far too heavy for the African sun. And there he was, standing near a stall selling carpets, wiping his red face with a handkerchief. Van der Hoven, the Dutchman. He looked less like a savior and more like a toad in a waistcoat. He was a man of the ransom industry, a broker who moved between the Christian and Muslim worlds, turning human misery into profit margins. Ciara checked that Hakim was still distracted. She took a step toward the Dutchman, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She kept her head down, feigning the submissive shuffle of a house slave, until she was right beside him. "Master Van der Hoven," she whispered in broken lingua franca. The Dutchman jumped slightly. He looked down, his watery blue eyes narrowing as he assessed her. He didn't see a person. He saw a risk. "I'm not buying today, girl," he grunted, turning away. "I do not sell," Ciara hissed, stepping closer, dangerously close. I buy a letter." She reached into the folds of her sash. For 3 years, she had played the part of the invisible servant. She had swept floors, scrubbed pots, and stolen. A loose gold button here, a small silver earring dropped by a careless concubine there. She had swallowed them, hidden them in the dirt of the cellar, and prayed. Now she pressed a small, heavy rag into the Dutchman's damp palm. He paused. The universal language of gold needed no translation. He opened his hand discreetly, glancing at the glint of metal. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to buy his attention. "Where?" he asked, his voice low. "Ireland. Baltimore," she said, slipping him a scrap of parchment she had stolen from Yusuf's study weeks ago. On it, she had written with charcoal, "Alive, Algiers, House of Yusuf, 200 florins. To the O'Driscoll family, or the priest," Van der Hoven scoffed, tucking the gold and the note into his vest. "Ireland? You're dreaming, girl. Europe is burning. The Catholics and Protestants are too busy slaughtering each other to care about fishermen lost in the dark. The French king treats with the Sultan. He will not rock the boat for you." "Send it," Ciara pleaded, her eyes locking onto his. "Just send it." "I will send it," he muttered, turning back to the carpets. "But do not hold your breath. Paper burns easier than gold, and memories fade faster than both." "Zainab!" Hakim's voice cracked like a whip across the market square. Ciara froze. She stepped back instantly, bowing her head, her heart stopping in her chest. Had he seen? Hakim pushed through the crowd, his cane raised. He glared at her, then at the Dutchman. "Why do you wonder? Do you think your legs are your own?" I thought I saw a thief, master," Ciara lied, the words tasting like ash. "I was protecting the master's coin." Hakim sneered, lowering the cane but not his suspicion. "You protect nothing but your own skin. Move." The walk back to the villa was a blur of terror. Every step felt like a march to the gallows. Had Van der Hoven betrayed her? Would Hakim check her sash? The letter was gone, out into the world, a fragile thread spun across a sea of indifference. It was a message in a bottle thrown into a hurricane. When they returned to the villa, the atmosphere was brittle. The silence was wrong. It wasn't the peaceful silence of the afternoon rest. It was the breathless silence before an execution. Yusuf was standing in the courtyard. He was not wearing his comfortable robes. He was dressed for riding, holding a riding crop, his face a mask of cold disappointment. In the center of the courtyard, held down by 2 guards, was Amira. Amira was a Circassian girl, barely 16, new to the household. She was beautiful and foolish. She had tried to bribe a garden guard with her body to let her out the back gate. The guard had taken what she offered, and then he had taken her to Yusuf. "I give you silk," Yusuf said softly, his voice echoing off the tile walls. "I give you food. I give you safety from the streets." Amira was sobbing, begging in Turkish, her face pressed into the dirt. "But you do not want my protection," Yusuf continued, walking around her. "You want the world outside. Very well." He signaled to the guards. "Take her to the quarry master. Tell him she is strong. She will haul stone until her back breaks." Ciara stood by the kitchen door, paralyzed. The quarry was a death sentence. It was where the broken things went. Amira screamed as she was dragged away, her fingernails scraping across the beautiful geometric tiles, leaving trails in the dust. Yusuf turned his gaze to the rest of the household. His eyes swept over the servants, the cooks, the slaves. For a terrifying second, his gaze rested on Ciara. Did he know? Did the Dutchman sell her out for a second bag of gold? Was the letter already in Yusuf's pocket? Ciara stopped breathing. She forced herself to be stone, just as Elena had taught her. She didn't look away, but she didn't challenge him. She became part of the architecture. Yusuf turned away, dismissing them with a wave of his hand. "Clean the tiles," he ordered. She made a mess. That night, Ciara lay on her straw mat, her body trembling uncontrollably. The letter was gone. Amira was gone. The thread was cast, but in a world where girls were sold for stone and gold bought only silence, she wondered if she had just signed her own death warrant. 5 years is a lifetime when measured in heartbeats of fear. The Zainab who moved through the corridors of Yusuf's villa was no longer the trembling girl from the auction block. She walked with a spine of steel, a ring of heavy iron keys jangling at her waist. She had become the Kahia, the housekeeper. She managed the pantry, disciplined the lazy, and ensured the machinery of Yusuf's comfort ran without a squeak. She had made herself indispensable, a strategy for survival that had worked too well. It was a Tuesday when the heavy knocker on the front gate slammed 3 times. Ciara, she still whispered the name to herself in the dark, was in the courtyard tallying sacks of grain. She signaled the doorman. When the gates creaked open, they revealed not a merchant, but 2 men in rough, dusty robes emblazoned with a red and blue cross. Trinitarians. The Order of the Holy Trinity for the redemption of captives. The older man, Father Gabriel, looked like a walking callus. His face was burned dark by the sun, his beard white and matted, and his eyes held the weary determination of a man who had bargained for souls with the devil himself. He carried a heavy leather satchel that clinked with the distinct sound of Dutch guilders and Venetian ducats. "We seek the master of the house," Father Gabriel said in perfect Arabic. "We come for the Irish woman, the one called Ciara." Ciara dropped her ledger. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent courtyard. Yusuf emerged from the upper balcony. He descended the stairs slowly, smoothing his silk kaftan. He eyed the monks not with religious disdain, but with commercial boredom. "There is no Ciara here," Yusuf said smoothly. "Only Zainab." "Her name is Ciara O'Driscoll," Father Gabriel corrected, his voice granite hard. "And her family in Baltimore, along with the Holy Church, has raised a sum of 200 florins. We have the paper from the intermediary, Van der Hoven." He placed the bag on the low table. He opened it. Gold shone in the afternoon sun. Ciara stopped breathing. It was real. The letter had survived. Her brother, her village, they hadn't forgotten. They had starved themselves to fill that bag. Yusuf looked at the gold. Then he looked at Ciara. He saw the keys at her waist. He saw the order of his house. He calculated the cost of training a new steward, the waste, the theft that would occur without her watchful eye. "No," Yusuf said, closing the bag and pushing it back. "The law of the day is clear," Father Gabriel argued, stepping forward. "A ransom offered must be honored." "The law applies to captives," Yusuf sneered. "Zainab is part of this household. She runs my affairs. She is not a common galley slave you can buy with a handful of coins. She is essential." He turned his back. "Get out." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced Ciara's chest. The no from the auction block had been about money. This no was about possession. He wasn't keeping her because he desired her. He was keeping her because she was a useful appliance. "Master?" Ciara spoke, her voice trembling but loud. Yusuf froze. A slave did not speak unless spoken to. "If you do not sell," Ciara said, switching to the Turkish she had been forced to learn, "the house will rot. The accounts will fail. I will burn every meal. I will break every vase. I will be glass, not stone." Yusuf turned, his eyes narrowing. The threat was real. He saw the fire in her that Elena had spoken of. A rebellious steward was worse than no steward. "Fine," Yusuf spat. "But the exchange happens at the harbor, before the port authority. I will not have these priests cheating me with clipped coins." The harbor of Algiers was a chaotic maw of shouting sailors, braying donkeys, and the smell of tar and rotting fish. The sun was setting, casting the water in blood-red hues. Father Gabriel stood by the gangplank of a small French merchant vessel, the Saint-Malo. The gold was counted out on a barrel head. The port official stamped a document. "It is done," Father Gabriel said, extending a hand towards Ciara. "Come, child." Ciara stepped forward. The wood of the dock felt unsteady beneath her feet. She could smell the Atlantic in the wind, a scent she hadn't known she'd forgotten. Suddenly, a hand clamped onto her forearm. It was a vise of iron. "Wait," Yusuf hissed. He hadn't let go. He pulled her back hard, jerking her away from the friar. The gold was already in his other hand. 200 is the price for a laborer," Yusuf snarled, his greed warring with his pride. "She is worth 500. The deal is void." "You cannot," Father Gabriel shouted, lunging forward. But Yusuf's bodyguards blocked him with drawn scimitars. "I am the law in this house," Yusuf roared, dragging Ciara backward. "She goes back." The flashbacks hit Ciara like physical blows. The platform, the hands on her teeth. 8 oxen, worth less than a horse. No, she was not an ox. She was not a horse. She was not Zainab. As Yusuf dragged her, his grip bruising her bone, Ciara reached up to her hair. Her fingers found the long, sharp brass pin that held her veil in place. It was a decoration he had bought for her, a symbol of his ownership. Now it was a weapon. With a scream that had been building for 5 years, Ciara drove the pin down. She didn't aim for his heart. She wasn't a killer. She aimed for the meat of the hand that held her. The brass spike pierced the back of Yusuf's hand. He shrieked, a sound of shock more than pain, and his grip shattered. Blood bloomed on his silk sleeve. "I am not your property," Ciara screamed, the words tearing from her throat in Gaelic. She didn't look back. She ran. She threw herself across the gap between the dock and the ship. She landed hard on the deck, skinning her knees, gasping for air. Father Gabriel scrambled aboard behind her. "Cast off! Now! Now!" The French sailors, seeing the drawn swords on the dock, cut the ropes. The wind caught the sails. The Saint-Malo lurched away from the stone pier. On the dock, Yusuf cradled his bleeding hand, his face twisted in a mask of fury. He shouted orders, but the gap was widening. The water churned between them, a barrier of blue that grew with every second. Ciara pulled herself up to the railing. Her veil had fallen off. Her red hair whipped in the wind, a banner of fire against the darkening sky. She touched the scars on her arms, the unseen scars on her soul. They would never fade. But as she watched the white city of Algiers shrink into the distance, the fire in her eyes burned brighter than the lighthouse. She was broken, yes, but she was free. The rain in Ireland did not wash you clean. It soaked into your bones and stayed there. Ciara stood at the edge of the harbor, the hood of her rough wool cloak pulled low against the biting wind. It had been 6 weeks since the Saint-Malo had brought her to France, and another 2 to find passage home. Now she looked at Baltimore. It was not the village she had left. The cottages that had burned on that night of ghosts had been rebuilt, but the scars remained. Charred stumps of old oak trees stood like black tombstones in the green fields. The population was thinner, the faces harder. The laughter that used to ring from the tavern was quieter now, dampened by the memory of the empty spaces where friends used to stand. She walked up the muddy road. Her boots, bought with the last of the church's charity, felt heavy. People stopped. A fisherman mending a net froze, his needle hanging in mid-air. A woman carrying a basket of turf narrowed her eyes, then crossed herself as if she had seen a specter. "Is that her?" A whisper floated on the wind, sharp as a knife. "The one taken by the Turks? She should have stayed dead," another voice muttered, "bringing her shame back to our door." Ciara kept walking, though the words stung worse than the salt spray. They didn't see Ciara O'Driscoll, the girl who loved the harvest. They saw a woman who had lived in a harem, a woman spoiled by the heathens. They saw a living reminder of their own helplessness. She reached the plot of land where her father's house had stood. It was just a foundation now, overgrown with weeds. But standing there, hacking at the brambles with a sickle, was a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair the color of rusty iron. He turned at the sound of her approach. It was Eamon, her little brother, who had been 12 when the ships came. He was 18 now, with their father's jawline and eyes that held a sorrow too old for his face. He dropped the sickle. He didn't cross himself. He didn't recoil. "Ciara," he choked out. "I'm here, Eamon," she whispered. "I'm home." He ran to her, crashing into her with a force that nearly knocked her over. He buried his face in her neck, sobbing like the child he used to be. For the first time in 5 years, Ciara felt safe. But safety inside the family did not mean acceptance outside of it. That Sunday, the church bell rang. It was the same bell that had failed to warn them on the night of the attack. Ciara walked into the small stone nave with Eamon by her side. The silence was suffocating. As she moved down the aisle, people pulled back. Mrs. O'Malley, the village matriarch, pulled her skirts away as if Ciara carried the plague. The priest, a young man who didn't know her, looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between his flock and the fallen woman. Ciara reached the front. She didn't kneel. She turned around. Hundreds of eyes stared at her. Judgment, pity, disgust. "I hear your whispers," Ciara said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the steel she had forged in Algiers. "You say I am unclean. You say I should have died." She pulled back her hood, revealing her face. The fire-red hair was unmistakable, but there were lines around her eyes now, and a faint white scar on her cheek, where a ring had caught her years ago. "I lived in a cage of gold and fear," she continued, looking directly at Mrs. O'Malley. "I was beaten. I was sold. I was erased, but I did not break. I clawed my way back across an ocean to stand here." She pointed to the ledger near the altar, where the names of the lost were kept. "You read my name as if I were a ghost, but I am flesh and blood. I am Ciara O'Driscoll, and I bring back no shame. I bring back victory." The silence stretched, heavy and tense. Then a cough broke it. It was old man Riley, hacking wetly in the back pew. He had been sick for weeks with a fever that the local leeches couldn't cure. He collapsed, gasping for air, his skin gray. Panic rippled through the church. "It's the fever!" someone shrieked. "Get back!" Ciara didn't pull back. She moved. She knelt beside the old man. She felt his forehead, checked his eyes. It was not a plague. It was a lung infection, aggravated by the damp filth of his cottage. "Water?" Ciara commanded. "Boiled water. And bring me willow bark and clean linen. Not the rags you use. Clean linen." "You can't touch him," the priest stammered. I managed a household of 50 souls," Ciara snapped, her eyes flashing. "I learned medicines in the East that you have never dreamed of. Now bring me the water." The authority in her voice was undeniable. It was the voice of the Kahia. Ammon ran to obey. For the next week, Ciara did not hide in her brother's ruin. She went to Riley's cottage. She cleaned his wounds with boiled spirits, made poultices of herbs she found in the woods that mimicked the remedies of the Orient, and forced him to drink clear broth. He lived. Word spread. Slowly the fear turned to curiosity, and curiosity to need. A mother brought a child with a festering cut. A farmer came with a broken arm set poorly. Ciara treated them all with efficient, unsentimental skill. She didn't offer them prayers. She offered them results. The stain of the harem woman didn't vanish overnight. But as winter turned to spring, the villagers stopped pulling their skirts away. They started nodding as she passed. They started leaving baskets of eggs and turf at Amon's door. One evening, Ciara walked to the cliffs overlooking the sea. The Atlantic crashed below, violent and gray. She touched the spot on her hip where the keys to Yusuf's villa used to hang. They were gone. In their place was a satchel of herbs. She wasn't the girl who had been taken. That girl was dead, burned in the fires of Baltimore. But she wasn't the victim either. She was something new, an alloy of Irish iron and Eastern fire. She looked out at the horizon, toward the south where the white city lay hidden by the curve of the earth. She didn't shiver. "I am Ciara," she said to the wind. And this time, the wind didn't answer with ghosts. It just blew, fresh and clean, carrying the promise of tomorrow. Ciara smiled, turned her back on the sea, and walked home. The story of Ciara reminds us that our value is never determined by how the world treats us, nor by the price tags others try to place on our lives. The world tried to value her at 8 oxen. It tried to label her a slave, a victim, and a fallen woman. But Ciara showed us that true dignity comes from within. It is the refusal to let your spirit be broken, the courage to turn your deepest wounds into wisdom, and the strength to heal others even when you are still healing yourself. No matter how dark your night may be, or how heavy the chains you carry, remember this: you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. If Ciara's journey from the darkness of the cargo hold to the light of the Irish coast moved you, please hit the like button to honor her memory. Share this video with your friends and family so that the stories of the forgotten are never lost again. And if you want to uncover more truths hidden in the shadows of history, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Let us pray. May the Lord grant you the strength to break the chains that bind you, whether they are chains of fear, regret, or the judgment of others. May He heal your unseen scars, just as He healed Ciara's, and fill your heart with a fire that no darkness can extinguish. May you always find your way home, no matter how far you have wandered. If you believe in the power of redemption and the strength of the human spirit, type Amen in the comments below. God bless you.